Hi, everyone. We've set up this Being an Engineer podcast as an industry knowledge repository, if you will. We hope it'll be a tool where engineers can learn about and connect with other companies, technologies, people, resources, and opportunities. So make some connections and enjoy the show.
If you're not embarrassed by the first iteration of your product, you're not moving fast enough. Too many companies will waste a lot of money making a perfect product, and then they end up having no customers for it.
Hello and welcome to the Being an Engineer podcast. Today we're speaking with Jon Rennie, who is the co-founder, president, and CEO of Peak Demand Inc., a premier manufacturer of critical components for electrical utilities. Jon is also a former U.S. Navy Nuclear Submarine Officer who made 7 deployments during the end of the Cold War. Prior to starting Peak Demand, Jon led 8 manufacturing businesses for 3 global companies. He is the author of 3 best-selling leadership books and is the host of the Deep Leadership podcast. Jon, welcome to the Being an Engineer show.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
All right. Well, what made you decide to become an engineer?
Well, it's interesting because I don't really have any history of anyone in my family ever becoming an engineer, but I decided early on that I wanted to become a naval officer on nuclear submarines. And as I did the research trying to figure out how does one go from being a kid in a small town in New Hampshire to getting on, these massive nuclear ships. What I learned was you had to have a technical background, and that increased your likelihood of getting on to the boats. So then I figured out, okay, well, I don't really know much about engineering. I don't know much about math and science. This was even before high school. I was researching this, and as a freshman in high school, as I started looking into this, and they said, well, you have to have math and science, and you should be an engineer. So I was like, well, what's an engineer? What are the possibilities, right? And electrical, chemical, all those things didn't make sense to me, but mechanical engineering sounded like, okay, well, I'm always been a person that can take things apart, put things back together, fix things. So I was like, well, I could probably figure out mechanical engineering. I could figure out mechanical things. So I said that's what I was going to do. I was going to try to figure out how to get into a good engineering school and become a mechanical engineer. So through high school, I worked hard to, get good math and science grades so that I could get into a good engineering school. But it was all so that I could get to the boat, so I could get to the fleet. So really, it was my desire to get into the submarine force that kind of led me down the path of engineering.
Yeah, so a means to an end.
Yes.
What do you think it was about submarines that called to you so strongly back then?
So I had 2 grandfathers that served in World War II, and I was that curious kid that just wanted to hear their stories. And, I grew up in Manchester, New Hampshire, and, people didn't leave this city. It was like you grew up here, you had your family here, you died there. That's what everybody did in Manchester. But my grandfathers went off and did this adventure in World War II, and they tell their stories. And as a kid, I was like fascinated by those stories. One of my grandfathers was in the Navy and one was in the Army. But as I researched and read books about World War II, submarines just sort of fascinated me. What they did, especially after what happened in Pearl Harbor, and the submarine force sort of took over and basically held the line while we rebuilt our fleet and were able to build up a navy to go back and to go up against Japan. But the heroics of those World War II submarine CEO captains. One of them was from my home state that I was just fascinated by reading about him. And I said, I want to do that. I want to go on some adventure. I want to get out of this city where everybody born is, you're born, you raise your family and you die here. I want to do something different. I want to go on an adventure. So that's what it was. It was a young boy's dream that turned into a reality. And it's, it's funny because a lot of people dream of being an astronaut or a firefighter or whatever. But usually those dreams sort of fade away. Mine never did. That was something I had a passion for, and I ended up, figuring out how to do it.
Wow. Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. Well, a lot of your career has been spent in leadership. But before we get to that, and we will spend a lot of time talking about that, I wanted to talk about engineering for a little bit.
Sure.
I read something on your LinkedIn profile that was interesting to me. It might sound boring to a lot of people, but for engineers, especially those who are working on products, I think this is an interesting and relevant thing to discuss. It was a little while ago, so I won't hold you, to too high a standard if you don't remember the details about this. But back in 1996, you led a team of 25 or so engineers to reduce your product warranty. I think it was by 50% or something. I'm assuming that means that 50% less product came back under warranty. Do you remember the process that you went through to do that? Because I imagine, a lot of us who are working on products, we would love to engineer more reliability into our products and have 50% come back in warranty. So what was the process that you went through to do that?
Yeah. So back then, I think at that time I was serving as a quality manager for the division that I was working for, a global company. It was ABB, a company called ABB, which is a large global engineering company. But so we had a lot of variability in our products. They were engineered to order products, and so inevitably, when you have variability in your product, you have problems when it gets out to the field. So a lot of us, we studied Six Sigma. I became a Six Sigma black belt. And so we had a team of black belts. So we started just taking the variability out of the products, trying to figure out what was causing, some of these failures in the field. What was it? Was it mistakes in engineering? Was it mistakes on the manufacturing floor? And just sort of diving into those, the variance in the product and trying to eliminate the variance. And so that we had a more consistent product and we had a more consistent way that we engineered these orders. And also how we checked to make sure that they were, right before they left the building so that they met all of the requirements of the customer. So it was an all encompassing effort that I led with, very smart and capable, quality engineers working on just attacking all the problems that we found in the manufacturing process and the design process as we built these products. So it was Six Sigma was the basis of it, but it was just a lot of hard work and a lot of effort towards trying to eliminate the variance in our product, both engineering and design.
Okay. Yeah. Six Sigma being the critical foundation, I guess, off of which all those efforts were based.
Yeah. Six Sigma. Yeah. And it was interesting because, there's a lot of tools in Six Sigma. And I think what we try to do is find the right tools to fix the problems that we were seeing. So we used a lot of the different tools from the toolbox to be able to, attack the problems that we saw.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience recently. I know this podcast is about you, not me, but this is a pretty relevant one. So I'll quickly share it. We purchased some video equipment, a jib arm that swings side to side, and it had a pan and tilt incorporated and even a focus ring for the camera, and to take some really cool videos of some of the products that we're developing. So we got it in, and I used to have a photography company on the side with a friend of mine. So I dive into it because I love this stuff. And it doesn't work. I can't get it to keep the positions that have been programmed into it. And I spent hours trying to get this thing working, and it wouldn't work. So I feel very embarrassed by this now because this is like troubleshooting 101. But I didn't break it down into its constituent parts. I just tried to make everything work together, and it wouldn't. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong. But finally, as I wised up and broke it down into its constituent parts, all right, let's just try the pan. Let's just try the swing. Let's just try the tilt. Let's just try the focus. I finally was able to figure out where the problem was, diagnose it, and get replacement parts for those axes of motion. So that was a good reminder to me. All right, dummy, break it down into all the individual constituent parts. Don't try and solve the system as a whole. It's exactly like what you were saying, John. Break it down into those individual parts, figure out where the problems are, and then attack that specific problem. So. Yeah,
and I would say that the previous management was always trying to solve there was a lot of finger pointing in the early days, and so when we came to it, we looked at it more from a data standpoint, like, okay, what does the data say? What are we being what does the data point us to that needs to be fixed versus, oh, it's engineering's fault. Oh, it's marketing's fault. Oh, it's, the manufacturing team's fault. So I think one of the nice things about Six Sigma is you get away from the finger pointing game, you get into the data and you start trying to uncover what's really wrong, what's really going on here. Like looking at the data, not looking at the process, not looking at the people. And I think that's a valuable lesson there in anyone who's doing manufacturing work or engineering work is focus on the process. Yeah, there are people problems too, but a lot of times it's a process problem.
Sure. Absolutely. Great point. Well, in 2002, you were recruited to basically turn around a company, both from a operational and financial standpoint. 200 million in sales, 600 employees. So a pretty good size operation here. That seems like a big undertaking. Do you remember where did you start? How did you even approach a problem of that size?
Yeah, so there was kind of more of a real leadership situation. I actually left I was in the electrical industry. I went into the welding industry, and we were doing welding consumables for a large global company. And so I mostly had led technical teams, or technical manufacturer or technical teams most of my career. Even in the Navy, I was leading technical teams. So, but here was a case of, yeah, there was technology. Our products were very highly engineered, but it was a people issue. I mean, just to fix the problems that existed in these manufacturing. There was 2 manufacturing plants, and to fix the problems, we had people problems, and we had a longstanding union that had been, at each of the plants. They had a very negative attitude towards management, an us and them attitude that existed in the operation. And so we were trying to bring lean manufacturing concepts to both of these plants, and also try to build relationships between management and the workforce that had not existed. So it was a leadership challenge, probably less of a technical challenge. Although at one point in the process, the union at one of the plants went on strike, and so the salary people had to operate the plant for a time. So it became an engineering problem as we tried to figure out, okay, how do we run this manufacturing equipment that no one had ever run except for the experienced employees, the hourly employees in the plant. So that's probably the only technical side of it, but it's much more of a people challenge. And it was a cultural challenge as well. I think for years there was animosity between management and the workers, and they just didn't see eye to eye. And I think it was really the biggest thing was building bridges. How do we build bridges between these teams? And I'll just give you an example. So we were studying lean manufacturing in the welding manufacturing process, and the best plant in the world in our company was in South Korea. So I took the union president and the vice president with me, just me and those 2 hourly employees. We went to South Korea together to see what the best plant in the world was doing and how we could learn to do it in our plant. So that's an example of it was a people problem, and I was trying to solve it using people and trying to build bridges to resolve and this long-standing animosity between management and the workers. And yeah, I would say this is we made a lot of progress, but these plants had been there for 40 years, and so it was hard this was a 5-year process. I think we made a lot of progress, but it's hard. It's difficult when you have 40 years of history that you're trying to turn around. So one of the biggest leadership challenges of my career, for sure.
Do you recall any of the other efforts that you embarked on to try and bridge that gap between, this cultural divide that existed?
Yeah, I would say my first manufacturing plant, I was 32 when I got my first plant. And I remember I was the youngest plant in the history of that manufacturing operation. And I remember thinking, when I went there, I noticed there was that us and them mentality between the hourly workers and the salary workers. Not so much management, but so the salary people. There were 2 locations in this business that had that housed all the salary people, and then all the hourly people were out on the shop floor. And I noticed that there was no common. there was no common places where people got together. So the hourly people did the hourly things, the salary people did the salary things. And I remember thinking, this was nothing like what life was on a submarine, right? On a submarine, we were all in one metal tube. We were all in it together. So there was no us and them. So as an officer, for example, we wore the same uniform, slept in the same size bunk. We ate the same food. When things went bad, it was bad for all of us, right? So we were all in it together. And what I realized in a lot of companies is that there's an us and them, that certain people are treated differently based on their position. And so one of the ways I picked to try to bridge that gap was a thing I called Fridays on the floor. So the first Friday of every month, I actually started working on the shop floor. You know, the show Undercover Boss, right? It's very similar to that, only this was before Undercover Boss ever came out. But I would go and work for 4 hours every Friday on a different place on the shop floor every Friday, the first Friday of every month. And so I remember I built relationships with the team. I saw what was really going wrong in the process. I saw where the procedures were wrong, the tooling was wrong. And so I saw all the problems from my hourly employees' perspective. Well, I remember trying to meet with my management team after those sessions. I'd bring them in for lunch and I'd say, this is all the things I learned. And I'd go. And they didn't understand what I was seeing. They didn't get it. They didn't have the same passion I did. And I realized at that point that I really needed to get them out there. So we made this mandatory for all managers to work 4 hours on the shop floor every first Friday of every month. And then when I started, we come back into the conference room, I bring in pizza or whatever, and we would just go over all the things that we learned. And we began to see what our employees were seeing, and they began to see what we were seeing. And so we communicated. They understood what we were doing in the offices. We understood what they were doing on the shop floor. We were able to solve a lot of problems because we had a common view of the business versus an us and them view of the business. And I think a lot of cases I see management teams trying to solve problems from conference rooms or from offices or they're not going, they're not using Gemba. They're not going to the place where it's made and actually seeing how it's done and listening to the employees and hearing their real problems. So I think, and that's something I did throughout my career, was this Fridays on the floor as a way to bridge the gap and to build relationships between the management teams and the people on the shop floor.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We've done a few similar things. Everyone at Pipeline has the option to work remotely or in the office, depending on what's most productive. The core value here is governed by productivity, not bureaucracy. So if it's more productive to work at home, work from home. If it's more productive to work in the office, work in the office. As a result, I'm migratory. I do a few days here in the office and a few days at home most weeks, but I don't have an office here at the office, right? I just sit out in the open space with everyone else. And I have a desk that I usually sit at, but sometimes I'll sit at another desk. And it's been invaluable just being in the same space as the rest of the team, because you organically start to hear things and observe things that you wouldn't hear or observe otherwise. And I think there's no substitute for, being on the floor, so to speak, with the rest of the team. And then another thing that we've done is a weekly team lunch. So every Wednesday, there's a standing invitation for anyone who wants to come to the office and join us for lunch. And that's been a great way also for just everyone to get in the same room and talk about things that aren't necessarily work related and get to know each other. And so those have been a couple of useful things that we've done to develop culture here. Well, let's see. You spent the early part of your career as a Navy captain on a nuclear submarine. Tell us a little bit about that. I mean, what's it like, just A, to be on a nuclear submarine, and then B, to be one of the leaders there? How does that translate into engineering leadership or just business leadership in general?
Yeah, I think, a typical day on a submarine, it's just like a typical day at work, right? You get used to your surroundings, right? I mean, just like when you come into your first day at work, everything's different, right? There's noises and smells and, I don't know where the coffee pot is. I don't know where the bathroom is. So you have to figure that out when you first get on board. But the difference is that they lock the door and nobody goes home. So you are stuck with, and I say stuck in a good way, you're stuck with the crew that you deploy with. So you're gone for, in our case, 3 months at a time with that crew. And there's nobody's leaving and nobody's coming. It's just you and that crew. and you have a mission to accomplish, and you want to get everybody home safely. And everybody has that same vision in mind. We have a common vision. So complete the mission, get home safely. That's a common that everybody, and we don't have to write it on a board. We don't have to talk about what our vision statement is. Everybody knows what it is. Do your nuclear deterrent and then get home safely. That's everybody understood it. So, but what's different and what's unique about life on a submarine, especially in a leadership role, is there's no going home after a bad day and having a beer. There's no saying, you know what, I'm gonna sleep in this weekend. I've had a rough week. You are in it 24/7 for 3 months at a time. I was Mr. Rennie for that whole time, or Lieutenant Rennie that whole time. And I never heard my first name, except for my few peers that were on board would say my first name. So you talk about being on stage. Leadership is being on stage, right? So people are watching you and seeing what you're going to say and just trying to see everything about you. And we were on stage 24/7. So there was no break. And it was very interesting to be in an environment like that. And as I mentioned earlier, we were all in it together. So there were no special privileges for the officers. There was 15 officers and in a crew of 155, so 140 sailors and 15 officers, and that was it. And we held each other accountable for the success of that operation. And one of the things I learned through that process is the most junior sailor was critical to our mission, right? In fact, the most dangerous job we did on the submarine, and you might laugh at this, was to shoot trash out of the bottom of the submarine. So we would compact our trash, and we had a small, almost like a torpedo tube, and we would fire it down throughout the bottom of the ship. And typically the guy who smashed trash and packed in the it's called a trash disposal unit, the TDU. The guy that operated the TDU is typically the most junior sailor on the boat, who was in charge of putting a hole at the bottom of the submarine. So, and I think the valuable lesson there is you don't see that much in corporate America. At least my experience is that we tend to, the junior people, they don't hold in high esteem, right? Well, let's just outsource our call center. Let's just outsource manufacturing. Let's outsource. We don't need to pay for all these hourly employees, right? So we don't have that same passion towards considering our most junior employees critical to our mission. And on a submarine, it is. You're all in it together. The other thing that's unique about a submarine, unlike any other military, unit, is that if something goes wrong, it's not like some will survive and others will die. We all die. We all perish. If there's a fire, we all die. If there's flooding, we all die. So we're in it together, and we have to hold each other accountable. There's a shared level of responsibility and accountability that is really unique to that environment. And I think if you take that and you put that into real business, right, and you're both, you share that accountability and responsibility for the business, and even your most junior sailor is important, even your most junior employee is important, you can get some really good results, is what I learned through my experience in running businesses.
Complete tangent question here, just on the subject of submarines. How long do you stay underwater at a time? I mean, I assume you have to come up for air at some point, but how long can you stay under the water? I mean,
if you've got a lot of engineers listening in, you could totally geek out on this. We make we make our own water. And then we use the water to make our own oxygen. So we have a nuclear reactor that can run for 25 years, and we make our own water and oxygen from the sea. And
I had no idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we are self-sustainable, and we stay under for those 90 days. We do not see sunlight. Yeah, well, in our case, the crews were all male, so we used to say there's no sunlight, no beer, no pizza. For 90 days, and no women for 90 days.
90 days underwater in red light submarine. That is intense. Okay.
Yeah. And when the lights go out, when things happen and the lights go out, it's the darkest place in the world. I can guarantee you that. We always carry a mag light on our belt because it is a very dark place. And by the way, if you hit your head on high, HT80 steel or HY80 steel, you're gonna feel it. So
you'll feel it, yeah. Ouch, that leaves a big bump.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to take a very short break here, share with the listeners that teampipeline.us is where you can learn more about how we help medical device and other product engineering or manufacturing teams develop turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines to characterize, inspect, assemble, manufacture, and perform verification testing on your devices. We're speaking with Jon Rennie today. Jon, customer success has been one of your obsessions throughout your career. What are one or two of the most important actions that you've had your teams take over the years to ensure that you're helping your customers succeed?
Well, it's interesting. It's why I formed my own company 7 years ago. Now we'll be 7 years in January. I started a manufacturing company called Peak Demand. And one of the things that we saw a lot of frustration with customers dealing with, because I work for the big players in our industry. And what ended up happening, and this is typical with big companies, is they chase elephants, right? So they chase the big customers. They want those big deals. You know, the salesmen get a big bonus check. The VPs get a big pat on the back when they land those big elephants, right? But what we said was our industry is filled with a lot of rabbits, I guess, best way to say, not elephants, I guess, a lot of smaller customers that are generally ignored, by our industry. So we have made, our point to take care of the smaller customers in our industry. So we're selling to electric utilities. So, every, small municipal that has an electric utility, they typically have a small electric department that handles the power in their city. And they try to do it all. These people that run these businesses are jacks of all trades. And so they need technical help and technical teams that can help them solve problems. Whereas the big utilities, the investor-owned utilities, have teams of engineers. So whereas the big companies focus on the large IOUs, the large investor-owned utilities, we've actually found it's the small utilities that really need the technical help and support. So we try to do that, and we try to give them basically world-class customer support, even though they're a smaller customer. And I think, as a small business, we can do that. And I think our customers really appreciate that. So an example of this. So I travel the country and I go to these, what they call meter schools. And this is where they're training their meter technicians. These are the people that are doing the power meters, in businesses and homes in their district or with their customers. Right. And so there's a lot of technology that's involved in that. So I personally go and I train those meter techs in how to operate the type of equipment that we manufacture. And they really appreciate that because, the big companies don't take the time to go out there and train them and teach them. So we are actually building customer relationships through helping them with technical training, and we do it for free. And typically they come to us for the product afterwards. They're like, "Well, you're the expert. We want the product from you guys." And so in fact, it was interesting because when COVID hit, everything shut. All these meter schools around the country shut down. And we were like, all right, well, we're going to do virtual meter schools. So we started doing virtual training around the country. And every time I set up a course, we weren't even selling it. We had a limit of 200 people, and we'd have 200 people book it within like 2 hours. And so we built a reputation on being experts in this field. And the big companies had much more resources and many more experts and people than we did. But yet we were the ones who spent time teaching the technicians and spent time teaching the technical side of things. So I think we built customer intimacy through that kind of a process, through teaching and training and support that the big guys don't do.
Fascinating. That's very cool. Let's go back to your not necessarily your submarine days, but you have all these cool analogies, having lived and worked in a submarine, that you've carried over into engineering and business. Let's see, how can business leaders run their company more like a submarine captain? This is one that you gave me, and I thought, what an interesting question to ask. So let's explore that one.
Yeah. So, one thing about a submarine captain is once you shut the door, you're completely responsible for that ship as it's out at sea, right? So you're the commanding officer. And one of the things is that you make sure that every one of your team members are fully qualified to do their job. This was an important thing the captain did. So he made sure that everybody went through a qualification process. So what didn't matter if you were an officer or enlisted, you had to go through a qualification process. In the case of an officer, it takes almost a year to get fully certified on every watch station on the ship. And what he did was he used more senior people to train the more junior people. So it was an apprentice kind of relationship. And so he would make sure that every person is qualified in that organization. Now think about it. Most training in most companies is poor at best. I remember when I first showed up after I left the military, I went to work for, I went to ABB right away. I was a design engineer in the design department. And I remember I got a cubicle and I got a stapler, and I didn't have a computer because they were working to get me a computer. It took me 3 to 4 weeks before they got me my computer. I didn't know what to do. No one trained me what to do. I just sort of sat in a cubicle. And finally I figured out, I started talking to other engineers, like, what do you guys do here? What can I do to help? I mean, it was zero training. It was like learn on your own,
Oh, wow.
And that's just not the way it's done on a submarine. We have to make sure. And again, I was telling you about, we are accountable to each other. We are responsible. We share this responsibility and this vulnerability. So we had to make sure that everybody was qualified. That's one thing a captain does, make sure his team is trained and qualified and is competent to be able to do the jobs that they're in. And I think that's a big thing that we can all learn from that, from submarine captains.
Very cool. All right. How about this one? How is firefighting on a submarine a powerful analogy for engineering and business leaders?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, talk about engineering. So the analogy is on a submarine, fire is one of the more dangerous things that can happen, right? Because, the air can quickly, become toxic, and you can, you basically knock people out, damage equipment, sink the submarine very quickly. So we are trained. Everybody on board a submarine is a trained firefighter. I am a trained firefighter. It sounds funny, but, we all are trained firefighters, and we are trained to ignore our instincts and run to the fire. So think about it in like an office, right? You hear the fire alarm goes off. What happens? Y'all leave, right? We head for the exits, right? And we let the professionals come in and put out the fire. We let, the firemen come and they go in the building. They find out where the problem is. They put out the fire. Well, there's no 911 on a submarine. We have to solve the problem. So we were trained to run towards the problem, run towards the fire, and put it out before it gets bigger, right? Because it could be devastating to the submarine. The same analogy goes with business, right? When we have a problem, no matter how small it is, if we don't run towards it and address it while it's early, we're going to have to deal with that as it gets bigger. And it could be so big that it puts our company out of business. And there's plenty of examples like that. But I'll give you one quick example. I took over a business, and I was the new general manager. And I started realizing there was a high level of warranty costs and a high level of customer complaints and a high level of customer concessions on this one product line. And I began to investigate what was going on. And it turns out we had these switches that were corroding in the field. They were rusting out. And so we were constantly replacing them. And the more and more I dug into it, I found out that, we had actually, the company had acquired a smaller company. They took that product that the smaller company had and put it into one of our products. And it turns out it was never rated for outdoor use. It was an indoor switch, and they put it in an outdoor configuration. And so guess what? There were parts on that switch that were rusting and corroding. And so, I ended up, my first year at that business, I called it the Great Apology Tour. I had to go around the country and apologize and replace a lot of these failed switches in like really major utilities around the country. As it turned out, the management team knew about the problem, right? They knew it was a problem, but they kept looking at what it would cost to actually redesign it, and it was very expensive. And then to replace it with a new product was also very expensive. So they just didn't see a good way to solve the problem. So they just kept shipping the switches with this defect. And so when I came on board, I found the problem, and I was like, shoot, we didn't run to the fire. We let this fire burn out of control. And I ended up having to go around apologizing. And my decision was, we decided we were going to kill the product line. So we had to discontinue that product because the cost of a redesign was far more than any future profits we could get from it. So we ended up having to kill the product line. So I ended up having to put out a very large fire because the management team previous did not put out those small fires and address the problem as you see them. So that's the analogy. Run to the fire, put it out before it gets bigger and hurts your business.
Something else I really like about that story is there's usually more than two choices. Oftentimes we get stuck between should I do it or shouldn't I do it, right? Your choice was, should we continue shipping defective product or should we spend the money to redesign it, which is going to be super expensive? Well, you came up with a third option. We'll just discontinue the product altogether. That's great.
Yeah.
I love that.
Well, it wasn't popular, but it wasn't a popular decision, but it was
probably not. But
that made sense when you put all the numbers together. And I ended up having to walk all our customers through how we would handle their warranty. We'd stand behind the product. We would continue to fix them as they broke. But it was a very tough situation to be put into because people hadn't taken care of the problem.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what are a few of the best ways that you've learned that engineering leaders listening to this can use to increase engagement within their teams?
Yeah, especially I'm going to say, talking to the engineers that are listening in. I mean, all right, there's some characteristics of engineers. We tend to be a little bit introverted, and I would say that I was probably introverted in my early days. But I think we also have been through some tough training, right? So that we know some things that other people don't know. So what's the problem with that? Well, we could tend to be loners, and we can tend to be thinking that we have all the answers as engineers, right? So we have to be careful to avoid that, because one of the things I've learned is that even when you're dealing with technical products, sometimes the best ideas come from people without degrees. And I think that's a hard thing for us to realize sometimes. It's good to turn the ego off, right? And turn on that emotional intelligence and get out there and talk to people, listen to the people, listen to the ideas from other people, because I think sometimes the best ideas come from the people that have been looking at the product for years, and not you as an engineer who understand maybe the technical side of it. But listening to somebody that's been touching and feeling and operating this thing for years, they tend to have these really creative ideas that you would not have thought of as an engineer. So I think we got to sometimes put our egos aside, and we have to be a bit more social and be willing to listen to ideas that are maybe not from a person with an engineering degree.
Yeah. That makes me think of an experience we had recently with one of our customers. So we were on a call with our customer. Two of them were on this call with us, and they were actually walking us through one of their processes that we needed to implement in this product. And they were saying the same thing, both of these individuals, but one of them was just a jerk. He was tactless, and everything he said had this air of, you guys are idiots. I know exactly what I'm doing, which was true. He did know what he was doing. But just the way he would phrase things, it made us feel small and not wanting to be engaged in the process. And then the other guy, who was in agreement with everything that the first individual had said, but he phrased things so much more nicely and I don't even know how to say it, but he was just so much more pleasant to communicate with. He was a lot more humble. He didn't come across as arrogant, and we were immediately drawn to him. We wanted to engage with him, and just, that difference. They were, again, both saying the same things. Their message to us was 100% in alignment, but one of the guys was just arrogant and kind of a jerk about it, and the other guy was super nice and helpful and welcoming. So I think just, the act of being nice and decent to people is a huge part of creating engagement in any team.
Yeah, I think so. I would say one other thing too is, as an engineer, we tend to know the answer sometimes, and we would jump to give the answer. And I think sometimes it's great to let our people explore a little bit and find the answer on their own, so that they have a chance to learn. They have a chance to have ownership of a process, instead of jumping in and giving them the straight answer. And I found that, especially later in my career, I have young engineers working for me, and they've got this great idea and they want to do it. And my first thought is, I've tried that before. That doesn't work. But if you jump on that and you don't let them explore and learn that lesson, like, oh, wow, that doesn't really work very well, then you take away that chance for them to learn. So sometimes I let people go with something, even though I maybe know the answer already, just so they can explore and learn on their own and have their own learning experience, so that I don't take that away from them. It's hard to do sometimes because we want to jump and I got the answer. And you're like, no, just let them figure it out.
How do you set up some boundaries, some bumper lanes, so to speak, so that, yes, you give the engineer some room to go off and explore and fail a little bit, but not so far that, the end result is just catastrophic?
Well, you just nailed it. It's controlled failure. I mean, that's something that they taught us in the military. So we would stand these under instruction watches, and they would throw every casualty at us. And there was always a senior watchstander standing next to us, and they let us fail. They let us completely fall on our face. And then we'd stop the drill and it'd say, okay, what happened? What'd you learn? What could you have done differently? And we had these powerful learning sessions because we failed, because the emotion of failing is very powerful. It's very important. We have to fail if we're going to learn sometimes, especially, I will say this, as engineers, we're stubborn and we have to fail sometimes just to say, okay, all right, that didn't work. So I think it's putting people in a situation where they can have controlled failure. So giving them a project, maybe as a new leader or a new project leader, is maybe keeping a close eye on them as they're going through it. So it's sort of a mentor relationship to let them fail, give them some string, let them make some mistakes, but be there to help them if they do get, so it's not catastrophic to the organization. So especially when it's new people doing something they've never done before. I do like to do that, to take new people and put them in experiences they've never done before for those valuable learning lessons. But when I do it under close watch. I want to make sure that I'm there if something goes wrong.
Yeah, mentored experiences, I think those are very powerful and effective in teaching people how to do things instead of just dropping them in the deep end, even if there's an SOP or some kind of instructions for you. Here, go do it. But if you can hold their hand a little bit and kind of walk them through it and be there with them, that's very, very effective.
Yes.
Let's see. You have been involved with a number of different product companies and have been involved with the launches and sustaining engineering work of a number of different products. For those companies out there listening to this right now who maybe don't have established product lines yet, but are just starting to launch maybe their first couple of products, what advice do you have for them? What are some of the roadblocks that a new product company might not even see coming that we should be preparing for?
Well, I would say this advice is probably the most important advice that I read and I put in place in my company as a new company, developing our first ever products in this new company, going to market. Is if you're not embarrassed by the first iteration of your product, you're not moving fast enough.
Oh,
so
interesting.
Get your products in front of your customers' eyes, even if it's not perfect. Too many companies will waste a lot of money making a perfect product, and then they end up having no customers for it. So I know we went to, in Peak Demand, my company, we went to a trade show a year into the launch of our company, and we had a really crappy version of our product. I say that now, but we didn't know at the time. We thought it was just pretty good. Your customers are going to love it. And we went to a trade show. We just got totally trashed by everyone who walked by. And they told us how this wouldn't work. You can't do this. This is wrong. And those were valuable learning tools, valuable feedback early in the process. So we said, oh, wow. And then we also met a lot of people that said, if here's some ideas. If you do it this way, no one else is doing it this way. Try it this way. So they actually came to us with feedback and ideas that would make our product better than anybody else in the market. So what I would say is get out to your customers early on with early versions of your product so that you get a chance to get that valuable feedback. And sometimes you're going to look back and say, okay, that was a little bit embarrassing. That was a juvenile product that wasn't ready for market, but that's okay because you get that valuable learning, you get that feedback, and you build some relationships. And in our case, we built a lot of relationships with the people that use our product, the linemen, for example, in one of our product lines. And they gave us so many ideas to make our product better than the competitors because we were the first people to actually listen to their ideas. Just simple things like, we're up in a bucket truck and we're trying to tighten this bolt. It'd be great if there was an arrow engraved in the product to know how we're supposed to wrap the fuse link around this one part. And so now we tooled a part that has an arrow to tell them which way to wrap the fuse link. It's a simple thing like that. No one else does, but we did it because it was based on feedback from the end users. And now people want that in their product because they know that we're the only ones that offer that, that feature. So I say it's really important to get your product out early and listen to feedback.
That's great. I like how you phrased it a lot. If you're not a little embarrassed by your first launch, then you're not moving fast enough. That's terrific.
Exactly.
Wise words. All right. Well, Jon, is there anything else that we should talk about that we haven't hit on yet?
No, I mean, I just think, I've been doing this a while. I've been leading for 3 decades, and I've been in leading technical teams, technical companies. And I think we tend to put a lot of value in our plans and our products and our mission statements and our vision statements. I just want to go back to the idea that leadership is a people business. It's all about people. And if we understand that it's people that are going to bring our products to market, it's people that are going to grow our business, it's people that are going to improve our customer relationships. If we understand that we need people, then we're going to understand that we've got to learn some people skills along the way as well. So, engineers, we're going to have to learn some people skills along the way if we want to be successful.
Absolutely. I recently read the Book of Joy, which is a discussion between the Dalai Lama and Bishop Desmond Tutu, and it was just really wonderful book. But to me, the message at the end was just joy is about people, and so really, we should be investing our time and our resources, whether it's from a commercial standpoint or just a personal standpoint, in people, more so than in widgets or processes, those things are important as well, but without the people, they don't mean much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Jon, thank you again so much. I sure appreciate you being with us today. How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, everything is on my website. It's jonsrennie.com, and you can find links to my social media there, links to my books, and links to my podcast, Deep Leadership.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Jon, thank you so much. I sure appreciate you spending some time with us today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
I'm Aaron Monker, founder of Pipeline Design and Engineering. If you liked what you heard today, please share the episode. To learn how your team can leverage our team's expertise developing turnkey equipment, custom fixtures, and automated machines, and with product design, visit us at teampipeline.us. Thanks for listening.